Hi everyone, I'm Claire Bacon with East Cobb Spine and Sport Chiropractic, and I'm here to show you today how to make your own homemade bone broth. So you might ask, why would you want to make your own homemade bone broth as opposed to buying what's readily available in the grocery stores? So first off, homemade bone broth is the #1 healing food for your gut. So if you've had any kind of abdominal, intestinal disturbance, if you've had any kind of a bug, a cold, a flu, anything like that, and you really want to get your internal gut back on track, homemade bone broth is going to be the most nourishing food that you can put in your body. What's different about what's in the stores is that oftentimes those commercially produced broths are going to be watered down, so they're not going to contain as many of the nutrients as you need, and they're also going to have additional additives that don't do your body any favors. Things like MSG that could be disguised as hydrolyzed yeast protein or something like that. It may have flavorings, it may have a ton of sodium in there that's not great for your health. So let's move on. When you're ready to make your bone broth, you want to make sure you have all your supplies ready. So if you want to have your bones, you want to have your crock pot ready, and you want to have your filtered water. So what I've done is I've put our regular home water, which is actually filtered through reverse osmosis, I've put it through a secondary filter through our Berkey. So I'm just going to go ahead and pour that into our crock pot. And so this water will be hot and ready for my bones. So I've already turned the crock pot on to high, and what I'm going to do is let the bones simmer in the hot crock pot for at least an hour. And putting it at high heat initially is basically just to kill off the bacteria and things that are in the meat and the bones like that. And then after that initial period is through, then I'll be turning that down to low and then continuing the cooking process for at least another 24 hours. Okay, so I've got my water in the crock pot, and then I'm going to take my bones and just go ahead and put them in carefully. Now you can say hello to my little precious kitten Gigi, helping out. I like to use chicken bones most often. That just tends to be what we eat in the house most frequently. You can pick up a rotisserie chicken on your way home from work. Makes it really easy. Just pull off all the meat, eat what you want, store the rest of it, and then just retain the bones in a freezer bag and just accumulate them until you're ready to use them. Or oftentimes I will get a whole chicken, from the store, and I'll bake it and cook it fully, and then I'll do the same thing. Just pull the meat off, store the meat, and then pull the bones off and store it in bags. You can also use beef bones, you can use fish bones, you can even use pork bones. I tend to think the best tasting broth comes from chicken bones. So I'll go ahead and add this in. And these were actually very small birds. Didn't have a whole lot saved from each one, so I've actually got bones from 3 different chickens that's going in here. This is actually kind of a large crock pot. It holds a lot of water, and so I think this will work just fine. So next step, what I'm going to do is add a little bit of apple cider vinegar. This adds some acidity to the water, which helps to break the bones down a little bit faster. It does probably give a little bit of flavor, but the main reason is to make the liquid nice and acidic so that it breaks down the bones and breaks down all the minerals and pulls the marrow and everything out from the insides of the bones. So what you're going to see when you finish this process is that the bones, once you touch and compress them just a little bit will completely shatter. They will just splinter and turn into nothing. And you'll know that that's because the integrity of the bones has all been dissolved and all those good fortified nutrients are going straight into the water. As you allow your bone broth to cool, you will notice that it is thicker and a little bit more gelatinous than anything that you would find in the store. Anything there is going to be watered down. It's not going to be as flavorful, and that's how you can like really see the difference in the health benefits that you're going to be getting here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill the crock pot with a little bit more filtered water to be maybe about ½ an inch from the top, and then I'm just going to set the lid on it. And in a little over an hour, I'm going to come back. I'm going to change my heat setting from high down to low, and then I'm going to let that go all overnight. I'll reset it in the morning so it'll go all during the day while I'm at work, and it'll continue on at low, maybe again all through tomorrow night. So for chicken bones, I'd like to do at least 24 hours, possibly 36 hours, but I'll check it when I get home and I'll see if those bones are like fully dissolved. Sometimes a little bit of water like will evaporate from around the edges, and so it's good to check it and make sure that there's still plenty of water in there. You don't want your water to burn off, so you always want to get like the full amount of broth that your crock pot can handle. Now maybe tomorrow night I might go ahead and pull off a couple of mason jars worth. You know, I might pull a couple of cups off or something like that, like especially if I might want to use it for cooking tomorrow night. And then I might continue to let the bones cook, you know, like an additional 24 hours. So you can let chicken bones go up to 48 hours, and that's totally fine. So in that way, kitty, in that way, you can really get your money's worth out of buying a good high quality bird, because not only will you have the meat for at least 1, maybe 2 meals for your family, but then you also have broth that you can use to make soups, you can use to make stew, rice, pasta. You just replace the cooking water with broth, or we even like to have it just as like a nice hot drink in the morning, like instead of coffee. So I will check back with you in a little while, and then I'll show you how to separate the bones from the fat and get it all divided in your mason jars so you're ready to go. Hey, I'm back. I just wanted to add one more thing for you. Some people like to add their spices in with their broth when they first make it, and maybe that's the only way you've seen your mom do it because she was making her broth for one specific purpose, like for one specific recipe. But I like to make my broth plain, so that whatever recipe I'm going to use it for, I can add the spices at that time. So if you're used to going ahead and adding garlic and salt and celery, carrots and onions, you know, if you know what you're going to be using it for and if those flavors work for that recipe, totally fine. But I like to make mine plain. So as I mentioned before, the only thing that I like to add to the cooking water is the apple cider vinegar. And I always look for a brand that contains the mother. So this one is just Simple Truth Organic. I usually like to get the Bragg's, but for whatever reason I got that one this time. And so I'm just gonna hold off on putting any kind of vegetables in with my broth because, you know, like I mentioned before, I might like to drink this as, you know, just like a hot mug in the morning. In that case, a flavor that might be better in the morning might be a little bit of cinnamon, maybe even a spoonful or 2 of coconut manna, which is a really thick coconut butter. It's like a good saturated fat and it's nice and sweet. So that kind of goes with the flavors that you want in the morning better than garlic and celery and onions and stuff like that. So totally up to you. There's like a million ways to make your own bone broth, and all of them are right. None of them are wrong. I'm just telling you a very basic way to get started so you can have some in your fridge when the moment strikes that you need to use it. Okay, check back with you soon. Thanks. Hi everyone, so now I'm back for step 2, gonna finish off this bone broth. So this is the fun part, and this is what actually takes the most time. This is, I mean, there's not really any difficult part of doing this, but this would be the most difficult part. So I actually unplugged my crock pot a couple hours ago, I guess about 3 hours ago, and I've been letting the broth cool so that I can handle it. You know, it's still pretty hot, but at least I'm not gonna, you know, hurt myself if I accidentally spill some on me. Oh man. Anyway, so what I've got is a fine wire mesh strainer, and I've also got my fat separator. So I'll be using both of these things. So now the fun part is just trying to pull out all the meat and the bones from the liquid, and then the liquid will be stored in my glass mason jars. So I've got several of these ready, clean, and waiting. Okay, so I'm just going to use my wire mesh strainer and a ladle. And again, the idea is just to find a way to pull all the meat and the bones out without losing the liquid. And this is just kind of the easiest way I've found to take big chunks out without sloshing a whole bunch of liquid like all over the countertops. And this will take a little bit of time, so just bear with me. Okay, so I've got some bones here taken out, and what I'm going to do is sort of the test to see like if your broth is completely done or not. Of course, now this has been cooking since last night, and so that's like 24, actually it's a little bit more than 24 hours at this point. And again, I used all chicken bones. And so if you can see this bone right here, like the test is just to squeeze it between your fingers and see if you can crush the bones. Now I just crushed the end of this little bone off of here. And this just, now that's the bone, that's not the meat. It just completely pulverized. And so like if you can see, I don't know if this will like focus, but this is like the marrow and the insides of the bones that are just like completely disintegrated. But so now the rest of this bone right here, it's not, I should be able to press it and at least like kind of break it in half, and it's holding solid. So I know I can continue cooking these bones. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drain off this liquid, package it up, and then I'll let the bones cook for another whole day, and I'll get another batch of broth out of this. So anytime you cook a whole chicken, or like you save the bones from a rotisserie chicken that you bring home from work, like you have the potential for getting so much, I mean, probably, I would, if you had to buy this amount of broth in a store, I would say probably $40 worth of store-bought broth that you can just get for free just by, you know, boiling and then simmering the bones. I mean, like, if you can see how this bone just like crushed, like it just turns into nothing. But if the center part of the bone is still hard, you know you've still got some good stuff in there. So, so anyway, I'm just gonna keep going with this. I won't bore you guys by watching the whole thing. But so basically I'm gonna take these bones, I'm gonna set them aside temporarily, and then they're gonna go back in the pot, and I'm gonna fill it up again with water and start all over again. So that was the main thing I wanted to show you tonight. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I will be back tomorrow for the finishing touches. Thanks. Okay, so I'm back. Next step, we're going to be moving on. So what I've done is I've strained all of the bones and the meat out of the broth using my wire strainer, my wire colander, and so it's fine enough to catch all the itty bitty little tiny bits and chunks of meat that you just wouldn't really want floating around in your broth. And so now the next step, what I'm going to do is I'm moving on to using my fat separator. So now unfortunately this is a plastic one. I'm definitely not fond of using hot liquids with plastic, but at this point it's even later and the broth has cooled even more, so it's not really that hot. So totally fine. So again, I'm just going to keep spooning the broth into the fat separator. And now this one is outfitted sort of with a large chunk strainer on top. So as I get lower into the liquid, I'm going to be picking up a few more bits of meat from the bottom that I couldn't get earlier. And I'm just going to fill this up, and then I'm just going to let it sit for a few minutes, and some of the meat is going to settle down to the bottom, and then the cooler it gets, the fat will make its way towards the top. So like if I were to just put this straight in the refrigerator for a couple of hours, there would be like a nice thick layer of fat on the top. So okay, so there we go. That's like totally full, and I'm gonna let this just kind of rest for a little bit, and then I'll come back to it and start pouring off into my mason jars. Okay, here we go. I'm back. So like now what we're gonna do, since I've let this set for a little while, I'm gonna take the little stopper out of the fat separator, and you'll see what happens is once the pressure is relieved, the liquid just kind of comes right up. Okay, so it kind of evens out the pressure between the two sections, and then I just use this to pour right into the mason jar. And so it's pouring basically liquid from towards the bottom, that if this were allowed to cool longer, 100% of the fat, well, a high percentage of the fat would be towards the top. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going until it's almost full. And I'm going to stop it about an inch from the top. Okay, and so here's one mason jar ready to go in the fridge. And you know, this can be drunk just straight, hot from a mug, or this would be like the perfect liquid to use when you make any soups or stews, rice or pasta, anything that you would normally use water for. You can use broth, and you can, you know, get a whole bunch more nutrients into your diet that way. So I hope you like that. I'm going to continue on, and I'll let you guys go. Thanks. Hey, I wanted to show you guys one more thing before I let you go for the night. I wanted to show you like how much sediment is getting caught in the bottom here of this fat separator. And so like when I'm pouring this off into the mason jars, I'm also kind of keeping a watchful eye for where the sediment is and trying not to let it go down the spout. So I just wanted to demonstrate this for you like one more time, and then just kind of show you like how awesome this broth really is. Now that I'm at the very bottom of the crock pot, there's like a whole lot more little bits of meat and tiny bones that weren't floating up high enough for me to grab them earlier. Okay. And you can see like how thick the broth is in suspension. You know, like when you go to the grocery store and you get store-bought broth, have you ever really looked at it, like, and compared it to what it's like when you make it? Like, Does the store-bought broth actually look like this? Like really thick and cloudy? No, it doesn't, because it's completely watered down. So I'm just gonna have a glass because this like smells so good. And so just like pouring slowly and trying not to let the thick chunks that I can see down at the bottom down the spout. Now I've got this nice hot glass of broth. This is just gonna be so good. And I'm getting tired, so this will be a great pre-bedtime little drink. Cheers. That's awesome. All right, on that note, I'll say good night. Good night.